As the 70s roll in, stability around the world has never been as shaky. Interplanetary alliances join together to seek ideological supremacy across both planets. Cultural shifts are uprooting norms that have been in place for centuries. Technological shifts have been changing how the world itself functions. As these shifts occur, life continues in the Seed-Bearer region, where a seemingly random group of people have come together to try and make sense of the nonsensical. This is Hazeltown Story. Hello, and I guess welcome to a special edition of Hazeltown Story. We don't have a tabletop for you this episode. In fact, this one is basically going to be an entirely a lore episode. This is throughout the playing and just kind of elaborating on some things about the background of the story of the background of Hazeltown Story and just kind of the background lore. Certain questions have come up that are talking about because the world of Hazeltown Story is semi-mirrored to our own, but big changes, like there's two planets. Also, the history of what's happened in those worlds compared to ours is slightly altered. By slightly, I mean pretty
significantly.
Big. Yeah. So I thought it would be a fun idea to basically just have a thing that was, in fact, this was a pretty early milestone in the Retro Rank Relief Drive to just kind of poke at some of those things of the background of Hazeltown Story and why, what stuff happened that is different from ours. And just to kind of start out with, because this is one of the bigger questions or stuff, kind of the bigger things to look at, especially it is where a lot of stuff changed. We're going to be focusing a little bit on some of the issues of colonialism today. In particular, what happened, or basically the countries that, your British Empire, Russian Empire, German Empire, maybe throw in a little bit of Japanese if we have a time. Kind of, just poke at some of those and figure out what happened and what kind of stuff was different. Also, this is probably going to be very loosey-goosey as we've not done this before, so don't know what the best format is. I think the first thing to I should say I have two guests with me.
Hello, it's me, Carnival.
Me, TorpidTypist for some reason.
Yep. I figured that both of you are some of the ones that have poked mostly at this. So I figured I'd drag you in to kind of also further poke on some of this other things and maybe just ask some of the questions that could, figure out where some things happened. So yeah. I know trying to think about where to start, and I think one of the things that we probably should start with is kind of something that happened in the background. Is the reason why the epoch's different from this world from in Hazeltown Story compared to ours, because there was a second epoch after AD, that being AR, which is after reconciliation, which corresponds, I believe, roughly to if I got my math correctly, is around I think it was around 1670. I think it was like 16, because I'm looking at my notes here. About 1700 is where AR starts, which is after reconciliation. Which at that point, the thing that happened that caused the epoch is basically the first case of transportation between the two planets that was not done by the Locution Empire. Because in the background of the Hazeltown Story, there is a group of people that we haven't really touched on. A few characters have been members of this empire. They're less trying to think how to describe them. They're basically forebears or precursors, kind of, that had a lot of access to technology that a lot of other groups didn't have. And in 1700,
Ancient aliens.
pretty much.
Look, to be fair, they're not pretending to be gods. It's fine.
No, they've kind of seen themselves as stewards of the planet and basically trying to make sure that if they could help, the people kind of basically they're trying to look out for making sure that people have or they're trying to help rather than they're not looking for they're not trying to take over everything. They just want to make sure that hey, things are going as
yes, the benevolent shepherds.
So they're nature preservationists, is what you're telling us.
Pretty much.
Which is a little weird.
Yes, it's part of the thing that I probably need to work a little bit more on. But hey, I got a lot. It's the thing of I am just the one person writing this, so a lot of my tension is ooh, I feel like we're thinking about this thing today, so that's probably some of the things I should focus a little bit more on.
No, this is fine. Once this comes up in character, trust me, a lot of our characters are going to be wait, hold up a second. You've been doing what to the planet for centuries?
Yeah. But to get to the point, they had access to go between the planets. And in 1700, I'm not actually certain who, because I'm thinking that one of the first. I'm trying to think about who would be a good what empire would be the one to, or because I would imagine this would be probably an empire that did this because probably had more people looking into it. I don't know which direction it would go, whether or not it would be a Romulus, which is basically our Earth, going to the other planet to Remus, or the other way around. I kind of thinking that maybe Japan might be one, or the Japanese Empire would be one. Maybe thinking because of what I think around 1700, what British Empire is probably pretty big. I should also preface, I'm not a history, but I have some interest in history. I'm not history was not my main subject in school, so there's probably a lot of things I'm missing, and that era of Europe is kind of a not I don't wasn't one of my focuses. So there might be some things that I am missing about this. But essentially around 1700, you had cases of
Also, the British Empire dates back to the very late 1500s.
Oh yeah, I knew that it existed. I'm just trying to think about in terms of scale of who is the largest empire around that time.
Yeah, because it started with the Caribbean largely.
Yes.
Yeah. But regardless, they had basically eventually some people were going cross planet, and the Locutians who saw that was oh, this could be a problem if they don't kind of get a handle on oh, hey, let's make sure that they're doing it correctly, I guess.
Those
or basically
Brits trying to colonize other planets.
Yeah, so they tried to kind of shepherd in hey, this is you're going across planets now. Let's make sure that countries are, aware that this is happening, and let's kind of maybe broker some kind of agreements. Also around this time, another bit of Locutian lore is the fact that in the past I have it where they had tried to be a little bit more, or they had cases of in their history where they were more warfaring and trying to seize some areas, because part of their biology, the Locutian species, is basically that only a tenth of them can go outside of the areas that they were kind of originated. Because if you think about how we had in story, how we had sylph colonies and all that, Locutians, basically a lot of them cannot go very far from a particular energy source. So they are kind of protective of those energy sources. And that's where a lot of those colonies exist is around places where you can find those energy sources. So part of the history that they've had is that they have had a weird history, and part of the reason why they are not exactly trying to take over a lot of things is that for some mysterious reason, whenever they would try and do that, the emperor or the kind of leader of whatever colony had tried to overtake other areas just dies of mysterious and horrifying illness that they couldn't figure out what the cause was. That they just like the leaders would just mysteriously die of like they would start having nightmares, and basically a lot of people saw that as an omen, which is like, hey, maybe we should try and maybe this is a sign from whatever because being forebears, they had like access to previous, like they have connections to something, and they sort of like, oh, maybe this is a sign that maybe we need to be more build less than or rather than destroy. I'm trying to remember where to go with this. So basically
you die in the dream, you die in real life.
Kind of. At least for that. There are reasons why this existed, but that will be maybe later discoveries.
Meta plot.
Yeah.
Oh, saucy.
And I'm just trying to think from that. Basically, at that point, around when the Locution Empire saw that there this cross planet or interplanetary travel was happening, tried to get everything together, and basically introduced several. They had connections in Europe, connections in previously established between places like Seedbearer. Another thing that happened in the background was the fact that colonization of the Americas basically was a massive failure by European empires. For example, Portugal that mostly tried to go, Portugal and Spain trying to take on the Latin and South Americas failed miserably. Britain's attempt to kind of, people like Christopher Columbus, that ended terribly.
So like you had to struggle not to say Columbo there.
No, Columbo is doing fantastic actually in the Americas.
Also in Japan for some reason, it's weird.
Yeah. But yeah, so basically to avoid a situation like that, Europe tried to, or Locution tried to see, hey, okay, we know the colonization is gonna if they're going unchecked, we know that colonization is going to happen, and basically they tried to broker deals with trying to, and one of the biggest deals happened with I'm thinking since 1700, probably British Empire, what it was, Holy Roman Empire is more of what maybe because French Revolution was late 1700s.
Right? The French Revolution is right after the American Revolution, so that's 1780-ish. Let me double check.
Yep, 1789. It looks like.
So I'm thinking that this probably trying to broker a interplanetary peace deal might take several decades.
So also to reel it back really quick, out of curiosity, what were the primary forms of interplanetary transportation outside of the locutions?
Basically it's teleportation. Like it's not like they have a wooden spaceship.
No, I'm saying, is it deliberate, accidental, like what?
I'm saying deliberate.
Okay.
It is basically using maybe reverse engineering some sort of magic to, do teleportation.
So
I was wondering if there are also cases of being spirited away or whatnot.
Possibly, but I'm thinking, I'm sure that probably if I wanted to do stories, I could do stories of people getting spirited away in some ways. Carnival, you were thinking something?
I was saying, so it's like Stargate in terms of just...
Yes.
Yeah, you have to basically have 2 points that are quote unquote quantum entangled, and you go between them like that.
Yeah. I'm kind of thinking, the way that I'm thinking of is more, I know I've seen it in something, but I'm thinking of like a giant circle with like, that basically everything within the circle gets transported. Kind of in terms of like how mechanically, well, how it would look. It's not like a Stargate where,
No,
actually
it's a
maybe
teleportation circle.
yeah. Actually, I'm
It's
thinking
just
maybe
a teleportation circle.
yeah.
Yeah, the question was more about like they have to be specific points that are too connected, not necessarily that it's literally a Stargate in that you just walk through.
Yes.
Because it's not like, oh, you can just teleport to anywhere in between the worlds. You have to specifically manually make 2 points that are directly connected to each other, like building a bridge.
From what I'm thinking, yes. I made right now in my head canon, so to speak, yes, that's how it would work. But after basically a lot of this, we're like, hey, we're having connections with countries that exist in Romulus and Remus, trying to connect them to. One of the larger kind of deals that came out of this, there is actually a country. There's a country that we haven't really talked about in kind of in story because it really hasn't needed to come up. There is if you kind of think of Remus as kind of a mirror of our world, but not completely. There is what essentially is the equivalent of Europe there, which is the country that I've just referred to as Prosperity. Because I'm guessing that my idea of that is that they just call themselves the Kingdom of Prosperity because they are essentially the merchant people.
We're gonna have to talk about some of those naming choices and what those imply later, but
they're essentially I'm thinking of the more they're basically the capitalists, which I have pretty sure I have not tied them into. I've tried to avoid, if I remember in my headcanon, any sort of J.K. Rowling bullshit.
Look, that's why you have us here to like. Look, there are a lot of these kind of things that people aren't just aware of that you can accidentally do. So that's why we're here to like, no, don't do that one.
Yeah, they are currently something that like, hey, they exist and they are because they are the, essentially build themselves on, capitalism, essentially that they connect kind of with. At this point, well, it's 1700, so that's not what they'd call it, or it's not. They're probably more of like a
mercantile empire because Adam Smith would have probably just released Wealth of Nations by this point.
Yeah, they're essentially another. They in function are essentially another European nation. Their kind of their history is very similar to that, and they connect with like the British, probably also because it's probably the British, the French.
I mean, everyone made a run for colonies in Western Europe at one point.
Yeah. So I think by 1750, those would be that. So they make a move to like, hey, also due to the way that population spread occurred on Remus, it's not the massive population spread. There happens to be a lot of areas that just there's nothing, like there isn't any, populations there. So there are swerves of land that just is not occupied by
Oh, that's right, because the Columbian exchange never really happened to the same extent because it's much harder to travel between two planets than just sail across the ocean.
Yeah.
So does that mean the Irish potato famine never happened then?
I don't know. That is something I would need to look into that I have not.
That's fair.
So essentially you have some European colonization of essentially they're like, hey, I should have had my map open. you had some of the areas to the north of like, I really should have had that document that I had on my. Let's see, do I have it in here? Where is my thing? Oh, this will actually. I think nope, that's the mechanics side. Essentially, they kind of go into area twin flame region. That's where I'm looking for. So let's see, on the planet Remus, you have places like Life's Canopy, which is to the east, which is roughly think of like that would be Scandinavia. That would be maybe like around Eastern Europe, around there where there really isn't any like you might have like an occasional like very small settlement, but it's not like they're going into like they're not trying to take over like say India, for example. It's not like they're trying to colonize another like group. We have some exceptions, as we'll get into in a little bit. So that essentially happens where that is how there is some European settlement in there. Also around this time, the Lacutians also have the feel like they had started to have some doubts about whether or not they should be because they essentially stepped in to prevent a lot of they stepped in to particularly help the essentially North America against the British and the French. So what would be in this universe known as the Turtle Island, but essentially is a lot of the Native American population or like tribes that were big there, especially you're dealing with like the Iroquois there. They helped them they got the British and French kind of got repelled. In terms of they are a kingdom. Prosperity, the Torpid was asking in text, what the government of Prosperity, they are a kingdom.
They're a kingdom. They are a specifically like ruled by a king.
Yes, at this point.
Okay, I was wondering if there's something like ruled by a king, if they're like a plutocracy or what.
They would be king. They might have had something similar to like a parliament at this time, but they had a history of kingdom of royalty that probably might have been transitioned to a more think about like 1750s era like Britain.
Okay, so parliamentary.
They were something more akin to like I was gonna say like the East India Company.
Something like that, yeah.
We're talking mercantile empire founded on a kingdom.
Yes. And so I'm trying to think because at some point through this, this is around 1750. Go ahead.
Nothing. No, go on.
So around 1750, if you think about like this probably takes a few years. So like 17th. So you're getting essentially into and I think we'll just cut the chase for the British side of this. Britain kind of, instead of like going like eastward, they went westward and essentially did what they tried to do with North America, but over to where the continent that trying to think, did I give a name for the continent or do I just do the subregions?
America was to the west of the British.
Hold on. So if you think
east would be the greater Eurasian continent, but yeah.
So they went towards regardless of whether or not I said east or west, they kind of went across the ocean, which I don't know what that ocean's called, but they went across the ocean, would essentially be the equivalent of Atlantic, which
that would take them to the Americas, yes.
Yeah, they went to the Americas. On the east side of the Americas, they are not nearly as populated as they were. At this point, you had some. This is kind of the region that was referred to, or that is usually referred to as River Heart. There is a lot of rivers in this area. There are some tribes there, but nothing that they have not like. There was no major like big tribe at this point. There are a lot of yes, there is an equivalent of Rhode Island.
I was gonna say that the state of New England, also Rhode Island is a special case, but yes.
Yes, so there isn't a lot of population at this point, so they're like, okay, let's just kind of make a settlement here. So that is where, that is where New England comes in. That is, I think for the most part, the U.S. the east part of it is essentially probably the same. The shape of it's different, but essentially, I'm imagining all the original 13 colonies are there. Florida, I don't know the power of Spain at this point.
I mean, at this point, they would have been an equal competitor. The British fleet hasn't destroyed them, and they haven't. I'm guessing they still, whatever they were, I don't know if they found enough silver to fuck their economy yet.
Yeah, that is again the questions that's just an area of my history knowledge that just kind of doesn't exist. So I know that there is some because I was thinking about in terms of Mexico, Spain definitely when they kind of got driven out, missionaries eventually came back to what is Mexico. I mean, it is still Mexico because the people of Mexico. So the way that I'm thinking of Mexico and Spain is more, it's kind of how modern day Mexico has a lot of more Spanish influence, but like the Nahuas still exist, but they're just a minority there.
I mean, so that's the same thing that happened in real life.
Yeah. So essentially, it's that Mexico in this universe is essentially that proportion flipped. So it is primarily Nahua and Mexico with a little bit of Spanish influence.
Also, the whole interbreeding thing
that is entirely. Yeah, that's a bridge cross maybe after we've done about
that
5
is
of
a
these.
deep hole to fall down.
Yeah, we need to get some consultants here.
Yeah. So essentially the British Empire, their thing or their gain from the interplanetary trade, I guess, from this is they got a colony in Riverheart, which, moved forward 30 years, probably, I would say even worse problems with representation. The American Revolution happens. They become America becomes America. But the thing with the US in this thing is that there is a massive power differential in terms of who already existed because, at this point, the tribes that would make up the Seedbearer Nation that, where Hazeltown is, has essentially, they have started to a confederacy at this point. They have started their own kind of, because they had heard stories of, the Lacutians helped them out because when their initial war with Britain and France over their colonization of North America, or what we call North America, there was essentially some, they brought some refugees over from North America into the region of Seabear because Lacutians have they have good relations with them. So they had already met, but they hadn't done anything at this point. And one of the things is that another side thing of when the European and prosperity deal is happening on the other side, the Seedbearer Nation and essentially the kind of the confederation that was starting to exist within what is now North America kind of connected. And that is one of the first interplanetary, country to country having a straight up alliance. So at this point, they were aware of what could happen with the British Empire. So they kind of were like, hey, you keep over there and we're not going to have problems. But you also have France going in, and that's where Canada, or what is referred to in this place as Nova Britannia. I think that is. I keep on. This is the problem where I'm not 100% certain with my own lore, which is I keep on wanting to call it Nova Britannica, but that's definitely not it.
Nova Britannica, my favorite encyclopedia.
Yeah, that's why I keep. Which is why I keep on getting annoyed that that's what I think, but no, it's Nova Britannia. Which at this point, actually, now that I think about it, that would be more Britain also takes care of that. But I imagine there's still some French influence in that. So Britain essentially loses America. So they lose pretty much their entire colony on Remus. I would imagine that they would still have India. They would still have a lot of the things that they still normally would colonize.
Oh man, the Opium Wars. Can't wait for that.
Oh God.
So that's another caveat that I would also say. Anything that happened between, well, actually I shouldn't say that. I'm gonna ignore that because actually that's not true. Trying to think, because at that point America's founded. Shenanigans still happen, so you got things like the War of 1812 still happens between, because the thing is that ends up a lot less favorable in America's thing, because that was essentially the only war that's happened directly between Seedbearer and the U.S. There were almost basically I'm thinking that there's almost a call about, it was kind of the same call that happened in the War of 1812 about whether or not essentially the Americans essentially be driven out. But basically they were allowed to stay. But basically hey, don't do that again. And basically it was we basically do not mess with us, because we could probably destroy you. But they just chose not to. And again, War of 1812 is another one that I kind of roughly know some of it's the problem of knowing some of it, but not all of it. But I just know that still happens. Other things that happened in regards to the British Empire on Romulus is essentially a lot of the stuff that's happened in our world, essentially partially into Africa, partially into what it would be. Yeah, because Jamaica, right, was definitely...
Yes, Jamaica was...
They definitely had presence there.
Yes, Jamaica was a British colony, so...
Which is another thing that I was thinking about, because a major part of... Because it's if I have this kind of forebear thing that's kind of acting as a guardianship, preventing some civilizations from basically allowing them to prosper, that brings up a very large question about what happens to slavery. So essentially at this same time around 1700, they're we will help broker this thing, but we aren't touching anything. We are essentially we will make sure this happens, and we're not going to involve ourselves. We are essentially, if we get involved anymore, we might have some problems with, this. We were warned not to touch too many things, and we feel like we're starting to do that. We're just going to, starting in 1700, we're just going to not touch much, which is why slave trade still happens, unfortunately, which is how,
whoops. Whoopsie made a bit of a fucky wucky. Oh man, there's chattel slavery now.
Oh no. How do we decide? How do we arbitrarily decide what is worth intervention and what isn't?
Yeah, so essentially they go on a major no intervention anymore. And then they do that. They have that policy for about 100 years. And then around 18, they're oh, we messed up.
Whoopsie made a bit of a fucky wucky.
Which is around the time they were oh, we might need to I'm debating about whether or not they just straight up did that, or they had an agreement that was hey, if you run into that, make sure that they're a very naive kind of thing, and then they're like, oh, we made a mistake and this happened. Which is like, hey, okay, we see that this maybe was a problem because other European influence kind of had some problems with, say, places like I would imagine that Life's Canopy, which is basically the biggest region to the right of, which is around, if you're kind of thinking of, it's probably lower Southern Europe or lower Eastern Europe, places like Greece, the Balkans, maybe even Northern Africa, and maybe like Western Asia. They have some problems with colonization. Another one that I actually am thinking of, because it's why something, or basically Russia also, the Russian Empire is also given some land through this. They end up colonizing what is essentially their version of Africa, the area that is called the Song Plains. That's just what it is, but essentially it is, they have managed to colonize Africa, or they managed to get Africa.
What part of Africa? Like,
I really need
Yeah,
to
and where do the French fit in?
yeah, because, like, again, Africa is huge, and there is so much land there that you can't just colonize Africa.
I would say the southern part. So essentially South Africa, that's not like, or the southern, South Africa exists in actual, like, the Africa that exists in this world, but the kind of landmass that's kind of equivalent to, I really need to get my map up. But I believe it's the south. I believe I have it as a southern part of. Also, I'll post the map. Here we go. So if you look there, kind of that area that looks where it's the now modern United Armenian Social States, that was originally at least partially Russian, probably the southern part of that map.
Okay.
You gotta.
No. I'm looking at this map again, and I hate my brain. That's all I'm gonna say.
All right.
I can spot a penis a mile away.
Oh no.
Just look, it's like the head's detached.
God, I was seeing an elephant. Thanks for ruining it.
Off on the right?
Oh, never mind.
Oh, I see it now. Regardless.
I'm here to ruin everything.
Regardless, yeah, so that is where Russia had some area there. Just trying to think of what else. I lost my train of thought. So any questions that come to mind? Because I think we've kind of established a lot of the stuff that happened in the late 1700s and going into the 1800s.
Only with the British.
What question do you have with the British?
No.
Oh, we've only
with the British.
We've
There's
only
so much
the
to worry about.
Oh, right. So definitely, I know at some point, I don't know if it was right immediately, Japanese Empire eventually also gets into and colonizes they definitely colonize what is the new, well, it is the area that is coincidentally called the new, well, it wasn't called at this point, but it is what the country is referred to as the New Asayan Islands, which is the islands that are essentially equivalent to Japan. The land masses are a little bit different, but you essentially have kind of almost going to New Zealand, as well as southern, kind of the southern part of the big landmass of Asia.
Can't believe the Kiwis are now Japanese. Thanks, phone.
I'm trying to think. I know that there is some French influence in the Heaven's Hearth region, French and Italian. In fact, part of the history that I have for Heaven's Heart is like their major export is, or it's not their major export, but it is a part of their cultural identity, is that they are very much artist, and that they are essentially. I have kind of imagined that they are traveling artists, like they try and gather art forms from as basically as far as they can travel, and they were introduced to French and Italian, like Renaissance art during at some point in their history. Probably, I don't know if it's pre like 1700s, where they initially had, because they also are what was the kind of Heaven's Heart, like the major. At some point, it was like a major. Trying to think of what the word is, but essentially a country that was a society that was more unified, and that they were so taken with French and Italian and art in Spanish art of that point, where they don't have as much of a connection to names as other societies, so they started just taking on French and Italian names as well.
No.
Which coincidentally totally is not me bullshitting why the two characters that I have that come from that region have French and Italian names. Not at all.
My favorite character from Heaven's Heart, Mario.
Yes. But they never like established a firm colony. Like they might have had one at some point, but eventually either died out or just got driven away.
So they colonized them culturally.
Yes.
What are their feelings on pizza?
I like pizza. So that's there. And I'm sure that there's other colonization that I haven't gotten to in my brain yet. So I'm sure that happened. But I think we should probably move on a little bit time-wise. 1800s, that is when the Locutians like, oh shit, we need to do something. So they start to form a society that is known as Lokia, which I think it was like Locution Intelligence Agency, essentially, like a very early form of, I guess you could call it their equivalent of the CIA.
I see. So they're going to start regime change wars, and oops, oh no, they run into the same thing that always happens when you try to do a regime change. Oh no, the people we've given the guns to have.
So their thing isn't more focused on regime change. They just have people they don't like. So
it's even worse then.
So they're like, hey, it's more people they don't like is that the people who are really into the colonization thing, they really don't like. For example, they start to. What was that?
So that's basically the CIA.
Yeah. Except instead of trying to help out our colonialization efforts, they try and destroy colonialization efforts.
If we can't have it, no one can.
Pretty much.
Yeah, that's a very American sentimentality. I can get behind
that. So basically, a lot of their original targets were, say, slave trades. Like they would just straight up go and burn down slave trades and like hunt them.
You can't have slaves, you fucking can't.
Well, they never, like, slavery was never part of their thing. They were like, oh shit, we caused an entire race to essentially, race to essentially be enslaved. Let's try and destroy the slave trade as much as we can.
Okay, I'm sorry, who's this that we're talking about again?
The Locutians.
Oh, the Locutians. Yeah, no, that's great. It's, yes, scorched earth because their plans didn't work.
Yes. So they start doing that. They don't involve direct action. They're more like, hey, we're just going to do this. And we have such a technological advantage that we could probably get away with it.
Good. Yes, these are clearly the good guys. Even if they're doing the right thing. Oh my God, this is.
These are essentially the. It is the equivalent of the plot in the cartoon of the kid who finds the superhero's toys and just tries to become a vigilante and it fails miserably. That is essentially the Locutian way.
I say, when was this?
This is around the 1800s.
Okay, okay. I was just waiting for like a clearer time because yeah, once again, uh, the Civil War was mid
Yes.
1800s.
Yes.
So they had some involvement in the like they did not directly help the Civil War, but the thing is that American expansion kind of went if you look at the map, it so instead of essentially going directly west into like areas like Ohio, um
They chose the Long
yeah,
Korea method.
yeah, they kind of did the long Korea, so you have going west out of essentially Georgia over into Texas by around 1850. They would probably go all the way to Texas. And essentially at this point, when seed
And they
bearers
looped
saw,
through like Arizona, New Mexico, up through
yep.
California.
So, because the thing that was happening is that the seed bearer region, like they are very much a hey, we're going to sit here and we're going to build up the area around us, and we're not going to try and expand. We're just going to try and take the area. And the area that they were in was pretty much Ohio, uh, Wisconsin,
The
Illinois,
Midwest. It's
Midwest.
basically the Midwest.
They see that America's expanding and they're like, oh, we know that they're going to try and go and do like a loop around us. So we're going to go west to basically take their, like, we're going to go and take essentially, hey, we have guardianship over this area. So you don't take this land because we know what you're trying to do and we don't want you to do that. So they have essentially like through treaties of the tribes that are kind of in their area and kind of getting them more into the because they're the Council of Seabearer Nations is essentially the country's name because they are a council of a bunch of different tribes. So they try and get people to join the council and kind of like, okay, we're going to protect you. So they're kind of having a race that way. So they can only expand across that southern part, which when the Civil War starts to happen, that produces an interesting little the South does not have nearly as much area. So they were much weaker than they already were. And when the Locution Empire saw that this was happening, like, oh hey, you don't have half your military support, and also the Seed Bearer. So essentially, that is the only time that Seed Bearer had allied with the U.S. is to essentially take on the South. And while that's happening, the Locution Empire is like, hey, I see these plantations. I'm going to firebomb them and essentially do an occasional murder. So they were
burning them down is largely what happened during the Civil War anyway.
It is, but also with a lot more of them got just straight up destroyed, which is why the Civil War in this universe took 6 months.
I mean, once again, the whole reason the Civil War happened anyway is because the South's economy was on the decline, and also the North was not respecting their request to send escaped slaves back specifically.
I mean, okay, you're making that sound much more. No, the South was even did
request,
Lincoln,
quote unquote.
Lincoln was never even going to do anything about this.
No.
Until they forced the issue because they got whiny like they have been, like the South has always been.
No, yeah, because their economy was on the decline, they were suffering for it, and also once again the North was not. They basically got really angry that the North wasn't sending their escaped slaves back.
Yeah. And then I'm guessing since the British didn't ever actually help the South in this case because it's like they didn't see the point because there was no way to undercut. There was not enough like of a thread there for them to try and undercut, right?
Yeah, and also that would be a huge logistical nightmare to try and help cross planets because it's like they don't have that good of a relationship, and also Seed Bearers certainly wasn't going to because they're even closer. Like if you think about Ohio and all that, they're not only not sending their requests, they are like straight up helping with the anti-slavery abolitionists are like.
Because essentially the North was booming economically, but the South was on the decline because the plantations were enough to keep up their flagging economy, which was basically a bubble.
Yep. So Civil War turned out massively like it was just like, oh, the South just basically got stomped.
Yeah. Also, without the Louisiana Purchase and all that, they had less land farther down south too. So that probably didn't help either.
So they managed to get so they have Louisiana, Alabama.
No, the Louisiana Purchase was fucking huge.
Yeah.
Right. Well, they got essentially the land that is of the okay, hold on.
No, they didn't.
No, they
I
didn't.
need to look.
No, they fucking didn't.
Okay. Okay. They have part of the land that was.
No, the Louisiana Purchase.
Oh shit!
Was
No,
a
they
massive
definitely
land
don't.
Deal.
Yeah.
Okay, that's okay. Okay. So they would have maybe Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma. They would have Oklahoma, but basically anything north of Arkansas is seed bearer region. So Missouri, Kansas, Colorado, anything to the north of that is seed bearer land. So they got part of it.
My point is, they basically were turbo fucked in this setting.
Yeah.
It wasn't gonna end well for them, even without the locutions.
Yep. Because seed bearer also would definitely have helped out with some torching.
Yeah. Oh, these slavers want to try and make a run for it. We have a casus belli. Let's go.
I mean, I'd assume also that Sea Bear region would have been a large part of the Underground Railroad.
Yes. Which is part of the reason why there is a large African part of or population in the seed bearer. Like if that was one of the reasons why, I imagine that is a.
Especially if they didn't fucking essentially torch down any sort of well-off black city like the North did.
Yeah.
That was a fun thing that also happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just trying to think. Let me check some real quick.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, because I'm just trying to think. I think maybe just have a brief discussion because I think might be a little bit more because I don't think we have enough time to discuss some of this. So I think we might just do another part 2 of this.
I mean, that's fine. There's always room for more. And basically, all we really discussed was the state of the North America equivalent.
So basically, after that, America kind of goes as far as. Basically, I'm thinking at this point, or basically, the U.S. kind of goes and from that point goes and takes California, probably Arizona, or not Arizona, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico. Kind of, so the U.S. is kind of shaped like a really messed up J. And I was originally thinking about whether or not they would have Washington, essentially the land that's equivalent to Washington and Oregon. I keep on flip-flopping in my head whether or not that should be seed bearer or that should be U.S. territory. But there's that. Any thoughts basically any thoughts at this point that you want to, maybe we can quick elaborate on?
Not at the moment, because I don't feel like getting into the nitty-gritty of my state and how it relates to the states around it.
I could think of, well, I will say that New England kind of, a lot of that probably matches what just happened.
Rhode Island is a special case.
Like, I might have to look into that, but...
Well, we're going to probably do more of these, if that's just what the answer is.
I'm just saying, if you want to learn more about that, just look into the history of Roger Williams more than anything.
Yeah. Canada, essentially... Canada kind of happens the same way that it did here. Probably more of a British influence and a French influence, although I imagine there exist. I feel bad about just removing that because, I feel really weird about representation sometimes, but also also when it comes to some representation.
Look, this is why this is one of those things we're going to table this and talk to consultants because...
Gotta workshop this one a little bit.
Yeah. Trying to think other 1800 stuff that I could mention real quick. Other regions, just like let's see, what did I have notes for 1800s? We mentioned Civil War. German state will take basically.
That's gonna be a big one.
That's gonna be. We'll table that. Tokugawa shogunate ending is another. Although that one is another bag of worms, but that one, the nitty gritty is.
You want to talk a real big bag of worms? Let's talk about the Opium Wars.
Yep.
Opium Wars is probably going also a little bit into the 1900s with and fall of the Qin Dynasty. Warlord. Go ahead.
The Opium Wars was specifically the mid 1800s.
Yep. Oh yeah, that's right. But then also that influence helps the fall of the Qing Dynasty or the area. And the fun thing I get to think about what happens with the split between the Kuomintang or the KMT versus the Chinese Communist Party, about how that went, because spoilers, there's some slight changes on who lives in that, because
let's talk about the Century of Humiliation as a whole.
Let's go. Time for the Century of Humiliation.
Because a certain writer of a red book doesn't live in this universe.
Boy howdy, the Century of Humiliation, Opium Wars included, is that's a fun one.
Yep. Other things to discuss in 1900s is the whole spread of the Russian Revolution and how that spreads into both how that affects Romulus and Remus, because there are two Russian states, quote unquote, in this point, and how the interplanetary split happens, about what were the more prevalent doctrines between those two. And those were some other fun notes. So I think maybe we'll pick one of those and focus on that maybe at some point in the future. I actually feel like maybe it'll be sooner rather than later, but I think this first little bit will help with me thinking about how I want to do these format-wise. But I think this worked pretty good for our first test run.
Pretty well, thank you.
Yes. Yeah. So anyway, that I think is going to do it for this episode. So thanks for listening.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Hazeltown Story. If you would like to get updates on this show and many other shows hosted by me, LoloDePuzlo, you can follow at Hazeltown Story on Twitter. And if you would like to get to know me more from a personal standpoint, you can follow my personal Twitter at LoloDePuzlo. If you would like to watch this be recorded live, you can go to twitch.tv/LoloDePuzlo and follow the channel for notifications of when this show, as well as other shows like Retro Rank Rhapsody, are being recorded. If you would like to add this podcast to your podcatcher of choice, you can search for WLDP Hazeltown Radio and find us on most major podcatching search engines. Or you can manually add rss.hazeltown.life to your podcatcher. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come around for the next episode.